Hello, I'm the Awkward GM Corbin, and today we will be discussing the up-and-coming urban horror role-playing game by Onyx Path Publishing called Curseborne. Now, it has been announced and has been since Onyx PathCon 2024, but a lot of the information that we've been getting is a little bit fragmented over the course of multiple podcast episodes, the demo version of the game, which you can find in a link down below. And then there are a bunch of blog posts that have been coming out that have been fleshing out the lore of the setting a lot more, as well as going into more details. Now, I can cover some of that, but most of that I suggest you check it out on their website. The new blog posts go up every Tuesday and Thursday, and there are more to come as it's going to be leading into their Kickstarter in October. So put that on your calendar. In Curseborne, you play what are known as the Accursed. These are people who have been cursed by these powerful familial curses that turn you into vampires or werewolves and other supernatural creatures that I'm going to talk about later on. Now, this is sort of the reason why you get brought into this supernatural hijinks going on. The curse sort of draws you into these sort of plot lines and things of that nature. We did have an AMA on a subreddit, the RPG subreddit, where Matthew Dawkins and a few other freelancers, such as Dixie Cochran, did answer some questions about Curseborne. My favorite one was when Matthew Dawkins said that the curse was sort of like why people get brought into the supernatural world. Even if they try and stay away from it, they'll notice things in the supernatural world, or that's what I was gathering from what he said. Additionally, Dixie Cochran did say that just because this might lean towards something like investigative or something like that, you might want to do something different with your group. So as long as the players want to do something different, they can do that. If they want to play a political intrigue game, they can do that. If they want to just play a slice of life game, they can do that as well. So let's talk about the mechanics of Accursed. They have skills and attributes that determine the number of d10s that they roll. Now, if you roll an 8 or better on a d10, that counts as a hit. And you need to have equal or more, or greater rather, hits to the target number that you're trying to hit, or the difficulty number you're trying to hit rather. So the defense of an enemy character might be 2, which means you need to get at least 2 hits in order for the action to succeed. Now, your characters are going to have something called entanglement, which is essentially your power stat for your character. This determines how many curse die your character is allowed to have in a roll. Now, cursed dice are the special sort of dice. So before, when we were talking about your skill and attribute dice pool, you might have might and close combat, both at 3, meaning that you have 6 dice that you're using in your roll. Now, if you are using cursed dice, you might have 2 cursed dice, which means those 6 dice now become 4 normal dice and 2 cursed dice. So when you're rolling, you need to roll these together, and if you get a hit on your cursed die, and at least 1 hit on your cursed die, and at least 1 hit on your normal dice, that counts as a wicked success, which is a positive narrative effect. But if you get no hits on both of the dice, that is what we call a cruel failure, which basically is a negative narrative effect. Now, it's not supposed to be too detrimental, but it can be stuff like someone you know in your family gets a positive or negative reaction to what you just did, or it can be something like summoning someone who has a good or bad personal idea of who you are. From there, we have the practices, which are categories of spells that your characters have access to. Now, each one of the lineages has 3 practices that they are able to take spells from, except for the sorcerers, who each one of the families get access to different practices. So whereas a primal might have a get of Leica or a hide, they'd both be using or gathering their spells from the same practices. Someone who's a sorcerer, who's one of the faceless or one of the reeves, they don't have the same practices across from them, so they have a little bit more differentiating them from within the family. From there, you have the spells, which are the special abilities that you can use from your practices. They're not technically spells in which you need to cast them with like a ritual spell or like saying some phrases or using hand gestures, but they're essentially special supernatural abilities that your characters have access to. Now, mechanically, you either bleed or hold cursed die in order to use your abilities. Holding cursed die is very simple. You might have an ability that says you need at least 2 cursed die to use this ability. And if you have more cursed die, you can use it whenever you want. It doesn't remove the cursed die from your pool, however. When you bleed cursed die, though, that is when you go from having, like, say, 2 cursed die down to 1. And when that happens, you get a normal die back. So 6 die is your like attribute plus skill roll, and then you replace it with one of your cursed die, just to sort of reiterate that point. And that's for stuff that is usually more active than the holding cursed die. Holding cursed die is for stuff like becoming invisible and things, from what I've seen in the preview, but that's just my opinion. Now, motifs are special bonuses your character gets from their families. This can be stuff like a special attunement of spell, which is like psychic spells or elemental spells, get like a special effect that gets added on top. Then you have your inheritance, which is a special ability that you get from your lineage or family path, and maybe your role path. Paths are essentially like your character class and options that you have access to. It also determines what attributes and skills you have. But your major one gives you access to a special ability called an inheritance. I might go over a bunch of them later on. Additionally, you have torments, which are a narrative way to gain more momentum points for the group. Torments are essentially a narrative way to give a negative effect, narratively speaking, or an inconvenience to the rest of the group, but in doing so, giving more of a resource to the players. So, for instance, if your character is addicted to something, maybe that's their torment, and they need to have that addiction. So they go out of their way and betray the party to get it. But in doing so, the group gets extra momentum to spend on stuff like making a failure into a success or adding more dice to a roll. Additionally, we have damnation, which is essentially when you go to 0 curse die, your damnation triggers and causes you to go into sort of like a frenzy when bad things start happening. And the only way to resolve it is to do something that regains you curse die. Usually this is something like feeding or making a deal with someone or any number of other things. What I will say is that the resolution for your damnation is sort of the way that one of the ways that you can regain curse die. So keep that in mind, that your damnation resolution isn't always only for when you reach 0 curse die. It can be used whenever you want. Important thing to note is that the mechanics of this game are not set in stone. They are still in flux right now. Storypath Ultra has yet to be kickstarted. It is currently August 2024, and they said that it's going to happen sometime after the Mythic Shards Kickstarter and before the Curseborne Kickstarter. But any of the improvements that occur from like the errata phase of the various manuscripts is going to be incorporated into Storypath Ultra so that they can improve on the system. Now, with that said, I don't know if these are going to be the final rules or not, but we'll just go with them for the preview before the Kickstarter happens. Now, for Curseborne specific stuff, we already covered Curse Die, but I want to say that you get them from fulfilling obligations to your family and role path, invoking your torment, when your crew works together, entering a place of deferment, which is sort of this neutral ground that all the Accursed know about, and invoking your own family's theme. Now, there is I don't know if invoking your family's theme also counts as the damnation stuff, but that's another way to gain curse die as well. Now, curse die can be used specifically for dice tricks, but it has to be the hits on the curse die that you roll in order to do some extra stuff. There's one for area, which basically means that for influence actions, you can target everyone within close range for it. So if you're trying to get everyone on your side, but you're doing it one by one, you can spread it out across multiple people. Past Friends is another influence action one, which establishes one bond point with a target. Glad Handing is also an influence action, which allows you to ignore complications or increase difficulty by social barriers. Otherworldly Sense is for investigation actions, which allows you to gain evidence from your supernatural senses. And then Reaching basically allows you to extend the reach of an action by one range band. Let's talk about the practices just for a little bit. There are a plethora of practice options. You have the emotional one, which is all about understanding, altering, and building upon others' emotions. Incorporeality, which is interacting and possessing things in the physical world while in your ghost form. This is mostly going to be for your dead characters. And Disincorporate, which is extend immaterial form to physical form. Now, I will state here that some abilities, some spells do cross over lineages. Some are even common across every lineage, and they do get denoted as such. Vital Force is your insight through consumption. So if you bite someone or take a feeding off of someone, that'll give you information about them. Iron Edict, you can control lesser creatures such as animals. This is used by the hungry, but it can also be used by the primal as well. Then you have Smoke and Shadow, which you become unseen or invisible. Mutable Form, which allows you to shapeshift yourself into others. Depthless Fury, which allows you to channel your anger into effects. And the Stranger, which transforms you into something else. I don't know much about the Stranger one. It sounds similar to Mutable Form, but we don't have any example of the Stranger practices. Dynamism is the power over violence and death. Manifestations allows you to summon weapons, armor, and transform. And Physical Perfection is you can perfect your physical form in some way. Now, we don't know what all the spells for these are. There's some examples in the Ashcan. And if you want to check out the Ashcan, again, I have a link, an affiliate link down below that you can purchase the Ashcan. I think it's like $5 for a PDF copy. And you can get a physical copy, which I have somewhere around here. With the Kickstarter, you are going to put some money down and hopefully get a PDF copy or a physical copy of the book, depending on what tier you put it at. Now, at the end of the Kickstarter or sometime during the Kickstarter, you're going to get sections of the book sent to you, which are going to be in a sort of Microsoft Word format. This is known as the manuscript, and it's sort of like their preview copy or alpha copy that they give out to readers and gamers who are going to try out the system. There's going to be sort of an errata phase where you can post questions to the developers or pose like there's a typo here or there's a logical inconsistency, stuff of that nature, so that the developers can fix it. But for the most part, the book is going to look very similar to what the manuscript copy is going to be. I'm assuming everything's sort of subject to change. My personal experience with the At the Gates Kickstarter, which they did, was that I got a bunch of manuscript copies of the various different chapters throughout the Kickstarting process. And then when the Kickstarter finally finished, there was like a week or two where we waited till we got the compiled version of the manuscript, but I could definitely still run the game with the like separated out chapters, or if I was inclined, I could combine them myself if I needed to. The Dead is a term used to describe ghosts that haunt their body after death. Now, they can take over other bodies afterwards in case their body gets destroyed, but just keep that in mind when we're talking about the Dead. The Dead are a lineage type for Curseborne. You are basically a ghost, which means that you can bleed a cursed eye reflexively to leave your body and go into a ghost form. I'm not sure if the ghost form is invisible or not. It seems like it is, but you cannot interact with the physical world unless you are using a spell. Then you can reflexively return to your body at no cost. However, if you don't go back to your body, you are going to start bleeding cursed dice and skill and attribute dots. Once you reach 0, you turn into something that is called a phantasm. Now, you can always reflexively go back to your body, which will recover all your lost dots, but not your lost curse dice. For undeath, you cannot die. If your body is destroyed, it instead gains the taken out status effect. And you can possess a body without consciousness, such as a corpse or a person who's brain dead, or you can possess an inanimate object, but you must spend 24 hours and bleed one cursed die to claim the new body. And that's me reiterating that you can become a phantasm this way if you don't get a new body. Now, for damnation, you need to experience a meaningful action based on the emotion that you're associated with. I will go over that in just a little bit. If an action is inconvenient, you gain a momentum or a curse die. This is sort of an ability that a lot of these things have, a lot of these accursed have. If it's inconvenient, you're always going to gain +1 momentum or a curse die. And then for some of them, they will gain +1 momentum and a curse die if it falls in line with their family theme. Now for Torment, you're going to gain +1 momentum for doing it. They have one that is called Yearning for Life, which means that you need to be as memorable as possible around people. The practices they have access to are emotional manipulation, incorporeality, and discorporation. And the various families they have are the Fury, which are their emotion that they're associated with is anger. You have the Shades, who are associated with sadness. You have the Poltergeists, who are associated with fear. Wardens, who are desperation. Mavens, who are exaltation or thrill. And then you have Zeds, whose emotion is closure. The Hungry are beings that feed on people in order to survive. They have a variety of different options for feeding, but it seems like their restriction is mostly done at the family level, though I am told there might be more information in some of those blog posts later on when we cover Hungry. Now, their feeding ability states that they gain 1 curse die when feeding, but feeding must be in line with your family of hungry. If allies help you, you add +1 momentum. You get an ability called Undead Strength, which means for one scene you gain 1 or more of the following effects, but you gain a Bane for each effect added. So you can get stuff like +1 enhancement to your physical, mental, or social attributes, or you can get regeneration 1 injury per round of combat. Now, some of the Banes that they gave were stuff like silver, sunlight, holy objects, and things of that nature. But also, in the presence of a Bane, you gain a moderate complication that, if not bought off, causes 1 injury. Complications are essentially an extra add-on to your difficulty that you're trying to buy off to succeed on a roll. If you buy off your difficulty but not a complication, you succeed but get a negative effect in return, such as +1 injury. For their damnation, they become ravenous and cannot gain curse dice, use undead strength, or use spells until they feed. The resolution is that they feed as per the feeding rules, and if it's inconvenient, they gain +1 momentum or curse dice, or if it's in line with their family tradition, they gain +1 momentum and a curse die. The Torment example we got was Take What's Mine, which means they claim over ownership of something that's not theirs because they're a little bit entitled. The practices they get access to are Vital Force, Edict, Iron Edict, and Smoke and Shadows. Now, the various families they have are the Black Hearts, who were also known as Dampier in the Curseborne quiz, if you had that option. Their hunger is for emotions. They feed off of the emotions of others, sort of like succubi. Now, you have the Gaki, who hunger for ghosts, so they eat ghosts as their as their preferred meal. The Heirs, their hunger is hearts, and I got that information from Danielle specifically because I want to make sure I covered each one of these correctly. House Bathory, their hunger is blood, also called blood bathing. They can eat it, and they can also like bathe in it in some ways. I think it's part of their motif that they could put blood over their face to get rid of a condition or something. That might also have been an inheritance. Any case, Iscariots, hunger for flesh, Verare, hunger for souls, and Acetates, hunger for memories. So for the Outcasts, they're essentially descendants from people who escaped from the outside. They're supernatural beings that aren't human but pretend to. Now, there are a boatload of them. I'm not going to go into detail about them, but they're sort of like angels and demons. They also, I love this artwork, by the way. This is very beautiful. And I do love the logos that we have in the top right and bottom left. The top right is the logo for the lineage of Outcasts, and the bottom left, I believe, is the Nephilim logo, but I'm not too sure about that. I'm not going to go in detail in it. I just really like logos when we have access to them. Now, for the innate abilities that Outcasts have. They do actually have a true form beneath their human form. It's a very cosmetic thing, but it does factor into some of their innate abilities they have, such as slipping off the mask, where you slip off a little bit of your mortal shell to show your true self beneath. And this gains you 1 automatic hit before rolling on an influence action. And this is a lot better than an enhancement, because enhancement only applies so long as you roll at least 1 hit, whereas slipping off the mask gives you a hit before you're even rolling. Now, entering the outside means you bleed a curse die to noticeably enter a battleground, which is something else I'm going to be talking about, that you know. And then you can bleed 2 for it to be a little bit stealthy. You can also reflexively return to reality without spending any curse dice. Now, you need to locate these locations in order to travel to them and such, but it's a great way of moving around from what I can tell. I think there might be a little bit more information we need to know, such as, is the battleground only accessible from the location where you found it initially, or can you access it from anywhere? Now, battlegrounds also are sort of part of the outside, which means that if an outcast does die there, they are taken out instead, but lose all their negative and positive bonds. And then they can still die in normal reality, though. So they are more powerful in a battleground, but in reality, they're a little bit less so. Additionally, we have their damnation, which is at 0 curse die. Everyone except the outcast who can see them gains the unearthly status effect. The resolution is they establish a new bond with a mortal. It is, if it's inconvenient, it's a +1 momentum or curse die. Now, this establishing a new bond with a mortal is how I assume they feed. Basically, making a deal with a mortal means that they get more curse die, as far as I can tell. So this is stuff like a demon's bargain or a devil's bargain, angel saying that they'll protect someone, or something like a fate contract are things that go through my head when I'm thinking about this. Now, for Torment, you have Show of Force, which is you must use your strongest ability to solve even a lesser action, even though a lesser action would do it better, especially if it's an overkill or causes collateral damage. So it's basically going really loud. And then as far as the practices go, they have dynamism, manifestations, and physical perfection. So here we have a new logo in the bottom left-hand corner, and that is for the Munificence. But in any case, the families we have are the Nephilim, who travel in the outsides to gain information and secrets. You have the Battlefield Angels, who are actively seeking to go into battlegrounds to fight. League of Hidden Crossroads. They're all about tempting people with devil's bargains. You have the Keepers of the Broken Vine, who commune with nature. You have the Chimera, who got cursed for trying to find godhood and have visible mutations around them. And then you have the Munificent, who grant people's wishes like a genie would to help people. This gives me a bunch of different character ideas from the different ones that we can see here. Particularly the Battlefield Angels seem to be all about protecting people by fighting in the battlegrounds. The League of the Hidden Crossroads are definitely more like demons. Keeper of the Broken Vine might be Fey-like, and the Munificent are your genie-type characters. I'm not sure about the other ones, but we'll find out more about them once the manuscript comes out or any more previews come out. Now we're talking about the Primal. These are your shapeshifters. You have them, they can change into usually the form of a creature, but some of them have more inhuman forms. Now this logo that we have here is the top left is the Primal one, and the top right is, I believe, the Hide one. Now, their innate abilities are their wild form. Every Primal has a wild form, which is essentially your sort of beast-like humanoid. They do have spells that allow them to go into more animal-like forms, but they're spells, not part of the wild form innately. As a reflexive action, you bleed 1 curse die and shift into your wild form. You gain a +1 enhancement to all physical actions, +1 difficulty on influence actions other than intimidation, and gain +1 stacking enhancement to defense actions, which is great because it's very hard to get enhancement for defense from what I remember of Storypath Ultra. Now, for your wild forms, you do have complications. There's a minor one, which means if you do a non-attack action and it's not bought off, you cannot leave your wild form until you take 1 injury and the creature decides your next action. The inner creature is essentially like, if you're a werewolf, it's the wolf inside you telling you to attack people, and its decision making is done by the story guide. For the moderate complication, any attack action, if not bought off, you cannot leave the wild form until the end of the scene and the creature decides your next action. And then you can reject the creature's influence, but it gives a +1 enhancements to opponents who are targeting you. And then you have Primal Senses. At the start of a scene, you may bleed a curse die to ask a question to the story guide about the characters in the area. It's sort of like, oh, you can smell fear on people, or the predatory creature within you is detecting something going on over there. For their damnation, you take wild form and you have a minor complication on all actions. If not bought off, then the creature takes control. The resolution is you must take an action that causes the aggravated wound, bleeding, destroyed reputation, taken out, or terrified status effect on a victim who can fight back. So you can't just be like attacking someone who's been knocked out or anything like that. And if it's inconvenient, you gain a +1 momentum or curse die. For their torment, the one that we were shown in the Ashcan is Elemental Fury, which means that when you're in wild form and combat, you have to hyper-focus on the biggest and most deadliest target. Now, this is an optional thing. It is to get more momentum, so don't worry. You don't always have to do it. You have access to the practices of Mutable Form, Depthless Fury, and the Stranger. As far as the families go, you have the Get of Laika, who are the werewolf creatures. In fact, their logo is the one that's up there right now. The Hyde one was the previous one, which was your creature is inhuman. This is the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde one, whereas you look like a normal human in your like Jekyll type form, and then when you go Hyde, you become a monster. An inhuman monster that's like super bulky and like kind of like, I guess ape-like is something that people use, but it can be flavored however you want. The raptors can turn into creatures such as birds or reptile-like creatures. Sphinx are your cat shifters. Spawn of Vodnik are kind of your like deep ones. They're people who turn into aquatic fish-like people. And then you have the 8 hands, which have like spider-like tendencies. Now, I feel like I'm going to have to put trigger warnings for a lot of my games if any of the 8 hands show up, which sucks. I do have players who do have arachnophobia, and it can be very difficult when spiders are involved. But in any case. So for Sorcerers, the only thing we have to go on is the character creation by rolling nomads for the Sorcerer character. Their curse is that they are ruled by the magic. They are addicted to it in a way that other sorcerer-type creatures in other games might not be. So Sorcerers, I really like how they're being done in this game as opposed to other games I've played with mage-like characters. They are cursed to be ruled by magic, so they are addicted to it in a way that you might not see, and it's a lot more mechanically present than I've seen in other games. This is my bias showing. In any case, their powers work on sacrifice. You must ritually sacrifice in order to gain curse die. It doesn't have to be a material to sacrifice, but it does require 1 scene for you to do it, so it's always a time sink in order to do a sacrifice. And including allies in the process gains you a +1 momentum as well as +1 curse die. Now, you can always cast magic even if your curse die are at 0, but from what I've been told and looking around, it seems like sacrificing is done at the story guide's discretion at that point. So for instance, if you start casting spells willy-nilly with no curse dice, suddenly you might find that one of like your pet dies because you decided to sacrifice life for that spell, and the magic just took that as payment instead. Fast casting is a way to choose to ignore the requirement of a spell, but you suffer a moderate complication that can cause the spell to go wild at the story guide's discretion. There's also something called a duplication effect. I'm using that as the term, but it's like a spell mimicry thing where if you've seen a magical effect in a scene, you can copy that effect. It cannot be done outside of that scene from what I can be told, but it does suffer the same complication that you get from fast casting, where if you're duplicating the effect and you don't buy off the complication, it can go wild, hit someone else, or maybe even do something that you weren't expecting it to do. For your damnation, at 0 curse die, you must use magic for even the most mundane actions. And in order to get away from that, you must do your ritual sacrifice. If it's inconvenient, you gain a +1 momentum or a curse die. If it's a traditional sacrifice, you gain +1 momentum and a curse die. The torments that they were shown, you have curiosity kills, you drop everything to gain power or knowledge. Unchecked hubris, they decide to do an idea that is terrible in the moment. As I said before, the practices for the sorcerers are 3 practices per family as opposed to 3 practices per lineage. An example we have here with the sorcerer families, I'll talk about the unburdened first. You have their sacrifice is possessions. They are not a family, but a movement without a hierarchy. They share everything with other members or immediately sacrifice it. Their major path inheritance is bleed 1 curse die if people notice you, to make the witnesses describe you incorrectly. And then for practices, they have biomancy, illusion, and telelocation, but those same 3 practices won't be the same that Reeves have or Premier have or any of the others. Other than that, we have the archivists who sacrifice knowledge, and they'll like collect secrets and you can sacrifice knowledge in ways such as sharing the secret to the public or destroying it. If you do destroy it, no one will remember what it was when you sacrificed it, not even you. The faceless, actually, let's go back to that. If you sacrifice something and you destroy it so no one knows what it is, I imagine that destroying it would be something like, oh, I know who actually shot JFK on that grassy knoll, and you sacrifice it. You don't remember the name, but you remember that you sacrificed the name of the person who did that. And maybe that person doesn't even remember that they did it now. Who knows? In any case, going on, we have the faceless. They sacrifice a claim. They don't take credit to do things in order to make the sacrifice by taking on the risk of doing the criminal action first. A lot of these sacrifices need to be clarified, I feel, because it does seem a little bit overpowered in some ways, because there might be a player character who is always going to be hiding their face no matter what. Or for knowledge, there might be someone who's like, oh, I'm going to sacrifice the knowledge of who did this thing or that thing. And in doing so, it seems very trivial, but I think having it need to be a meaningful sacrifice will fix that issue. For the network, you can sacrifice connections to people. They're essentially a pyramid scheme. They cultivate relationships to people and cut them off in order to fuel their magic. But there are rules to not do this with other accursed. A lot of the time, feeding from accursed is a good way of becoming someone who is an outcast from what I'm seeing in this game. Effectively, if you start feeding from accursed people, you're going to make some enemies. For the premier, they sacrifice time and effort. They're a family of rich people. They have examples of like sacrificing their time through obligations and being known, such as volunteering their time to do some charity work and things of that nature. They physically have to do it, it seems. So take a scene to go to a soup kitchen is how they recover their curse die. Then you have the Reeves, who sacrifice life and death. They support nature by honoring life and death. They sacrifice creatures or even save people from death in order to fuel their spells. I had an example that I thought of where someone starts buying mice from the pet store that are going to be used for food, and you are sort of giving it life by making sure it doesn't get eaten by a snake or something. And I did the unburdened at the start. They're pretty interesting. I have a little meme in my head where it's like, oh, where do you keep all your stuff that you sacrifice? Well, I keep it in a bag, and the person just takes the bag, and it's like, you can't own a bag. I love this artwork as well. So the adversary tiers, so these are the like tier list of difficulty that each of the adversaries are. You have the shivers, who are sort of your manipulated or cursed into service hench people. They're sort of like your lower tier enemies that will die in droves. You have the Frights, who are a little bit more menacing, and they usually have Shivers as followers. And you have the Terrors, who are named adversaries with distinct personalities that often direct the Shivers and the Frights. And then you have the Nightmares, who are the ultimate monstrosities capable on taking on multiple Accursed at once. And I think there was reference that they might also be like the leaders controlling the Terrors, if you want. Shattered spaces are specifically the sort of like liminal spaces that people can go into that are haunted in some way or don't behave like reality and start feeding on the people that are inside them. They're very dangerous and they're very toxic to those who get caught in them. So we do have some adversary examples here. You have the Red Riding Hoods, who are terrors. They were one of the example ones in one of the blog posts. They're humans who bested a curse and took a trophy from their victim that granted them monstrous abilities. The idea is that Little Red Riding Hood, when she was saved, they skinned the wolf, and she wore the wolf's skin as like a new coat or cloak or something like that, and it gave her special abilities like a wolf. Additionally, we have stuff like the drones, who are your brain dead, brain drained victims of some Accursed and from shattered space feeding. There are some Accursed that do feed directly from the people. These are your like sorcerers who sacrifice a person. They're outcasts and the hungry, but like the primal and the dead don't really feed off of individuals. Instead, what they do is they like hunt or they try and invoke emotions around people. Then you have the zombie flesh eaters, which are your basic zombie archetype. They're often in the thralls of rogue Accursed. And rogue Accursed are a thing that gets talked about a bunch as well and gets thrown around as like a sort of hint that if you just like delve into your damnation a little too much, you become like this antagonist archetype for your lineage type. Going on, we have the Champagne Room, which is a shattered space that is in the Ashcan. It is a nightclub that feeds on the life force of its patrons. Additionally, we have mention of the Ahab or Venators. I'm not sure exactly where this comes from, but this was Matthew Dawkins had mentioned it in an AMA. In Izzy's case, which is the primal example character in the Ashcan, the Ahab is someone who can instinctively sense the curse and wants to extinguish it with extreme prejudice. And then the Venerators are essentially people who are like essentially hunter type characters that have some curse that allows them to identify or at the very least know about a curse. I'm not going to go into too much detail about them because we really don't have that much detail about Venators, or whatever they're called. We did have stat lines for our cops in the Ashcan. It's just a sidebar. It's a very simple sidebar with they have a special ability which makes them suspicious if the complication is not bought off. And then we have phantasms who we know are dead who go crazy when they've been unanchored for too long. They were shown in the actual play of Curseborne for Onyx Path Con. And then there's the TBD stuff about the antagonist sorcerers, who are spellcasters who don't care about who they hurt with their magic when they sacrifice. But there's probably a lot more antagonistic type families maybe for Curseborne. I don't know if they'll actually be family types. They might just be antagonists or adversary types that we can sort of fight against. Maybe your character can become one, but I don't know if it would be standard play for you playing as an antagonist type character. So let's talk about liminalities for just a little bit. These are locations that border the outside, which is the place where the outsiders and outcasts are from, and reality. In general terms, they're locations that warp reality, and they're harder to escape from typically. Locked liminalities are hidden except for the accursed who can sense them, and it may require an offering or a ritual to sort of gain access. For open liminalities, they're easy to enter and stumble into. Mortals often find themselves thrown in there, and they may have some restrictions on who's allowed in, such as only allowing men or women in, or people who have lost love, or any other sort of abstract criteria. Commonly, liminalities are the real world bleeding into the outside, but there are others that do it differently. Interstitial areas are sort of these cunning areas that may have an intelligence that try and trap people inside them, but they aren't malice. One of the ideas that they have in here that they bring up is the possibility that these liminalities are places that have no emotional attachment to them, and they're trying to find people to come to them in order to have an emotional attachment to them. Basically, they want friends. For battlegrounds, they are brought about in locations where a great tragedy has occurred or a battle, like anywhere where a crisis or some sort of tragic event has occurred. They are when the outside is bleeding into the real world, as opposed to the real world bleeding into the outside. And they are incredibly dangerous, and they have like caustic environments. But there's a lot of stuff you can find that's interesting there, though typically you're not going to find anyone who's willing to negotiate or trade in things. They are dangerous war zones that reveal your true forms, and the Outcasts really like them and might wax lyrically about them being the perfect place to test your mettle because they can't die there, obviously. But other people, when they go in there, such as primals, will be brought into their true wild form. The dead will be taken out of their bodies, and the hungry might, I don't know, show their true forms as well in some way. I didn't go into too much detail when I was looking that one up. Shattered spaces are kind of the more predatory locations that feed on those who get trapped in them. There's an easy way to get out typically, but only if you can reach it. So you might go into a liminality that has like quicksand in it, and you're slowly sinking to the ground as the liminality is feeding on you. But the door's right there. As long as you could get to the door, you can get out. But the room is actually fighting against you and trying to take you in. Oftentimes, humans might get caught in there and trapped. I think there are a lot of talk about like the battlegrounds in particular. Mortals can't really get access to the battlegrounds unless an Accursed takes them in or someone else brings them in there. So the ones that you really have to worry about for people finding them by accident are the interstitial zones and the shattered spaces. There are some things I haven't talked about in this video, such as how in Curseborne it seems like some of the families are matriarchal, where there's a mother that leads the entire family. There's also some insight into some of the various different families from the blog posts. Highly suggest you read them if you want to catch up on what Curseborne is about. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Onyx Path's website, as well as the Onyx Pathcast, which is probably going to talk more about Curseborne as the Kickstarter gets closer and closer. Check it out in October. I'm really excited. I'm planning to do a lot more for Curseborne around that time. Thank you so much for watching. I'll point you over here to a Curseborne playlist or something like that if you want to find out what more I figured out. But it's really, a lot of it's speculation and maybe even out of date at this point. Thank you so much for watching. Click the like button if you want people to find more about Curseborne. Really like that Onyx Path Publishing is diving back into urban horror games again.